The sound of gunshots echoed across the open prairie, shattering the morning stillness. Two bodies hit the ground before the echo faded into the distant mountains. Mason Blackridge stood motionless, Colt revolver still smoking in his right hand. The horse thieves who'd made the mistake of stealing from him lay 20 yards apart, neither one having managed to clear leather before Mason's bullets found them. He holstered the weapon with practiced precision, his weathered face revealing nothing as he approached the nervous horses tethered nearby. The animals shifted and huffed, sensing death in the air. Mason ran a calloused hand along the neck of his stolen Appaloosa, speaking low and steady until the animals settled. "Easy now, it's over." His voice was gravel and whiskey, hardened by years of mountain winters and the ghosts of battles long past. He mounted in one fluid motion, gathered the reins of the second recovered horse, and turned toward the distant outline of Silver Creek. Supplies were running low, and despite his distaste for civilization, some necessities could only be acquired in town. The main street of Silver Creek fell into an uneasy silence as Mason rode in. Women gathered children closer, men straightened their postures. The massive figure astride the Appaloosa commanded respect without effort. 6'4" of solid muscle, long-barreled Winchester rifle across his back, Colt .45 on his hip, and eyes that had seen too much death to be troubled by mere stares. "Steel Mountains come down," someone whispered, using the name that had followed Mason since the war. The storekeeper, Wilkins, nodded tersely as Mason entered. "Mr. Blackridge, been a while." Mason placed his list on the counter. "Need these, and ammunition, .45 caliber and Winchester rounds." While Wilkins gathered supplies, commotion erupted outside. Mason's hand instinctively shifted toward his revolver as he moved to the window. A stagecoach had arrived, and a young woman stood bewildered in the street, trunk at her feet, terror gradually replacing confusion on her face. "James Holloway's dead, miss," the stagecoach driver was saying. "Fever took him 3 weeks back. Don't know why nobody wrote to tell you." The woman, barely more than a girl really, stood frozen. Golden hair caught the sunlight, her blue dress a splash of color against the dusty street. Mason watched dispassionately, noting the way her shoulders tensed as 3 men approached from the direction of the saloon. "Well, ain't you a pretty little thing?" the tallest one slurred, whiskey on his breath visible even from a distance. "Lost your husband-to-be, have you? Don't you worry. We got plenty of room for you over at the saloon." The girl backed away. "Please, I just need directions to the boarding house." "Boarding house?" Another man laughed, grabbing her arm. "That's no place for a lady like yourself. Come along now." Mason remained still, watching through the window as the scene unfolded. Only when the third man grabbed her trunk and the first began dragging her toward the saloon did he move. He stepped into the street, silent as a mountain shadow, and drew his Colt in one smooth motion. The shot cracked over their heads, freezing everyone mid-step. "She doesn't want to go with you." His voice was low but carried like distant thunder. The leader turned, hand twitching toward his gun. "This ain't your business, mountain man." Mason's eyes narrowed slightly, the only visible change in his stony expression. "I don't want to kill men today." He thumbed back the hammer. "But I will." Something in his voice, the casual certainty of a man who had killed before and would do so again without hesitation, made the men reconsider. They released the girl, backing away with muttered curses. The street remained silent as Mason approached the young woman. Up close, he could see she couldn't be more than 19, with eyes that held too much fear for someone so young. "Thank you, sir," she said, voice steadier than he'd expected. "Name's Mason Blackridge." "Sarah Calhoun." He nodded toward the boarding house. "Town's not safe for a woman alone. Mrs. Peterson runs that place, but she charges double what it's worth, and the walls are thin." He paused. I have a cabin, spare sleeping area. It's safer than here. Her eyes widened. You're offering me shelter? Not offering charity, just practical sense. He secured her trunk to his spare horse. No one deserves to be left to the wolves of this town. The trail up to Mason's cabin twisted through pine forests and rocky outcroppings. Sarah struggled to keep pace, clearly unused to mountain riding. Without comment, Mason slowed his horse and began offering terse instructions. Keep the reins loose crossing the stream. Horse knows his job. Or, lean back on the descent. Let the animal find its footing. By late afternoon, the forest opened to reveal a clearing where Mason's cabin stood. Solid logs, sturdy roof, smoke curling from the chimney. But as they approached, Mason raised his hand, signaling for silence. The cabin door stood slightly ajar. A smear of blood marked the threshold. In one fluid motion, Mason dismounted and drew his Winchester, gesturing for Sarah to stay with the horses. He moved with the silent precision of a predator, approaching from an angle, keeping to cover. It was the movement of a man who'd survived ambushes and learned to anticipate danger. Inside, he found a wounded man sprawled near the fireplace. The stranger wore buckskins stained with blood, his leg torn open from thigh to knee. A bear attack by the look of it. He was semi-conscious, muttering through parched lips. "Water!" Mason called, and Sarah appeared with a canteen from the saddlebag. Mason cleaned and stitched the wound with practiced efficiency, his large hands surprisingly deft with needle and thread. Sarah assisted without being asked, holding supplies and providing water when needed. "You've done this before," she observed. "War teaches hard lessons." The injured man stirred, opening bloodshot eyes. "Lieutenant," he mumbled, delirious from pain. "The ridge. They're flanking us." Mason's jaw tightened imperceptibly. He said nothing, continuing his work until the wound was cleaned, stitched, and bandaged. Sarah's eyes moved from the wounded man to Mason. "Lieutenant, that was another life." He stood, washing blood from his hands. "He'll recover. Name's Bill Jenkins, local trapper." That night, Sarah slept on a cot separated from Mason's by a canvas screen. Despite her exhaustion, she lay awake listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the wilderness, the distant howl of wolves, the whisper of wind through pines, and the occasional shifting of the injured man by the fire. Mason sat cleaning his rifle, his silhouette visible through the canvas. A man of few words who'd saved her twice in one day, yet remained as mysterious as the mountains surrounding them. As sleep finally claimed her, Sarah wondered what circumstances had shaped a man like Mason Blackridge, and what fate had brought her to his door. A week passed. Bill Jenkins recovered enough to sit by the fire and share news from his travels. His eyes lingered on Sarah with growing recognition. "You know," he said one evening, as Mason returned from hunting, "there's wanted posters circulating. A girl from back east, judge's daughter, family murdered." His eyes narrowed. "Description matches our guest here." Mason set down his rifle, expression unchanging. "Time for you to head out, Bill. Your leg's strong enough." Jenkins nodded slowly, understanding the dismissal. When he'd gone, Mason turned to Sarah, who stood rigid by the window. "You didn't tell me everything." It wasn't a question, and she didn't treat it as one. "My father was Judge William Calhoun," she said, chin lifting slightly. "He sentenced Raymond Harlow to hang for murdering 3 families during a robbery. Harlow's brother Edward swore revenge. He came to our home at night, killed my parents, my younger sister." Her voice cracked. "I was staying with a friend. When I returned, there was nothing left but ashes and bodies." Mason listened silently, then nodded once. "Now I know who our enemy is." The simplicity of his response caught her off guard. No judgment, no questions about why she'd withheld the truth. Just acceptance of the fact that her problems were now his problems. It was a soldier's practicality, she realized. Identify the threat, Prepare for it. The next morning, Mason discovered boot prints around the cabin, too precise for a hunter, too deliberate for a casual traveler. Professional, he muttered, examining a discarded cigarette butt with Virginia tobacco. Military trained or bounty hunter? He glanced at Sarah. We're being watched. Mason spent the day fortifying the cabin. He strung nearly invisible tripwires among the trees, positioned his weapons for quick access, and constructed hidden caches of ammunition at strategic points around the clearing. Each action was methodical, born of battlefield experience. In war, he explained as he checked the action on each firearm, cleaning and loading with meticulous care. Good preparation is half the victory. He showed Sarah how to load and fire his spare revolver. Keep your arms straight. Breathe out before you pull the trigger. Don't jerk it. She was a quick study, her initial fear of the weapon giving way to determination as she practiced. By sunset, she could hit a can at 20 paces. Not consistently, but enough to matter in close quarters. That night they came, two men approaching silently through the trees from opposite directions. Mason had been waiting, positioned at the window with his Winchester. The first shot took down the man to the east, clean and precise through the shoulder, designed to wound rather than kill. The second attacker dove for cover, but Mason was already moving, slipping out the back door like a shadow. Sarah waited inside, revolver ready as instructed, listening to the silence broken only by the wounded man's groans. When Mason returned, he pushed a second man ahead of him at gunpoint, this one uninjured but pale with fear. Talk, Mason ordered, voice colder than the mountain night. Harlow sent us, the man confessed after minimal persuasion. Edward Harlow's got a bounty on the girl, but it's more than that. He's bringing his whole crew. Paid Victor Rawlins' gang, too. Rawlins, Mason repeated, recognition flashing in his eyes. 10 men riding this way, the prisoner continued. Maybe more. Mason bound the man's hands, then cut him loose. Ride back to Harlow. Tell him Mason Blackridge is protecting the girl. He wants her. He comes himself. The name had an immediate effect on the man, whose eyes widened. The Steel Mountain Man? From Gettysburg. Go, now! 2 days later, Mason and Sarah rode into Silver Creek for supplies. They needed ammunition and provisions if they were to withstand a siege or, more likely, prepare for an offensive. Mason had no intention of simply waiting for Harlow's men to come. While Mason purchased ammunition, Sarah found herself confronted by Reverend Thompson and several women from the town's benevolent society. They formed a half circle around her, faces pinched with disapproval. It's indecent, the Reverend was saying. A young woman living unchaperoned with a man of Blackridge's reputation. A crowd gathered, drawn by the confrontation. Mason emerged from the store, boxes of ammunition in hand, to find Sarah surrounded. This town has standards, Blackridge, Thompson called. The girl should stay here, with decent Christian folk. Mason set down his purchases and walked forward. The crowd parted instinctively, no one willing to physically obstruct his path. She's under my protection, he stated, voice carrying across the suddenly silent street. Not because I want her, but because it's right. Anyone who has a problem with that, we can settle it now. No one spoke. No one moved. After a moment, Mason collected his supplies and helped Sarah mount her horse. As they prepared to leave, Sheriff Porter approached. He was a lean man with a silver-streaked mustache and the measured movements of someone who'd seen his share of violence. Mason tensed slightly, hand dropping to his revolver. Blackridge, Porter nodded, then surprised them both. Harlow's not just coming with Rawlins's boys. He's got at least 20 guns. Word is he's not just after the girl. It's vengeance he wants. Mason studied the lawman. You're warning me? Served under you at Gettysburg, Lieutenant. Figure I owed you that much. Porter glanced at Sarah. Town can't help you officially. Too many scared folks. But some of us remember what you did in '63, when you saved our entire company by taking out that Confederate artillery position single-handed. Left 12 men dead without firing a shot. Mason nodded once, understanding the unspoken offer. Obliged, Sheriff. As they rode away from town, Sarah expected them to return to the cabin. Instead, Mason led her deeper into the mountains, following game trails invisible to untrained eyes. By nightfall, they reached a hidden cave concealed behind a waterfall. "We don't defend," Mason explained as they settled inside the natural fortress. "We hunt them, one by one." He sketched a rough map in the dirt, outlining his strategy. They would use the territory Mason knew intimately, setting traps and creating ambush points. "They think they're the hunters," he said. "We'll show them what it means to be hunted." Over the next 3 days, Mason transformed the mountain into a weapon. He set deadfalls on narrow trails, constructed noise alarms from tin cans and wire, and identified killing zones where attackers would be exposed while defenders remained concealed. Sarah proved herself a capable partner, learning to move quietly through the forest, to read tracks, and to prepare ammunition. She wasn't just surviving, she was adapting, growing stronger with each challenge. When Harlow's men came, they split into small groups to cover more ground, exactly as Mason had predicted. The first team of 3 encountered a tripwire that sent a boulder crashing down, crushing one man instantly. As the others scrambled for cover, Mason's rifle spoke twice from 200 yards away. Clean shots, professionally delivered. The second group fell into a concealed pit, impaling one man on sharpened stakes. The survivors retreated in panic, firing blindly into the forest as Mason's bullets found them with methodical precision. By nightfall, 5 of Harlow's men were dead, 3 wounded, and the rest increasingly desperate. They regrouped at an abandoned trapper's cabin where Edward Harlow himself had established a command post. Harlow was a tall man with a scar running from temple to jaw, a souvenir from a prison knife fight. His cold eyes reflected firelight as he interrogated the survivors. "One man," he repeated incredulously. "One man and a girl did this?" Victor Rawlins, the leader of the hired gang, spat tobacco juice into the fire. "Not just any man. That's the Steel Mountain Man, Lieutenant Mason Blackridge from the 2nd Pennsylvania. Took out an entire Confederate ambush squad at Gettysburg. I'm not getting paid enough to go against him." "You'll do as you're told," Harlow snarled, pressing a pistol against Rawlins's temple. "Or I'll kill you and every man in your gang." In their hidden cave, Sarah finally asked the question that had been burning since the sheriff's revelation. "Why do they call you the Steel Mountain Man?" Mason was silent so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, Gettysburg, 2nd day, fog rolled in thick over the ridge. Confederate scouts were mapping our positions. My unit was pinned down, commander dead. He checked the action on his rifle, a ritual that seemed to center him. I went out alone, moved through their lines in the fog. They never heard me coming, just felt cold steel. He killed 8 men that day, using only his knife to maintain silence, saving his unit and providing intelligence that helped turn the battle. The story spread, and a legend was born. After the war, there was no place that felt like home, he continued, his voice softer than she'd ever heard it. "The mountains gave me peace." Sarah touched his hand briefly. "Perhaps when this is over, I'll need to find that kind of peace too." The vulnerability in her voice stirred something in Mason he'd thought long buried. But now wasn't the time for such reflections. Dawn would bring more killing. On the 4th day, Mason made his decision. They couldn't eliminate all of Harlow's men without risking Sarah's safety. A direct confrontation was needed, on his terms. He left a message carved into a tree trunk where Harlow's scouts would find it. "Harlow, old trading post, noon tomorrow, just you and me. A real man handles his business face to face." "He'll bring men," Sarah warned as Mason explained his plan. "Counting on it." Mason's eyes held a cold certainty. "But he'll come himself, too. His pride won't let him hide. The old trading post was a clearing surrounded by crumbling log structures, remnants of the early fur trade. Mason arrived an hour early, positioning himself carefully. Sheriff Porter and a handful of trusted townsmen were hidden in the surrounding forest, waiting. At precisely noon, Edward Harlow rode into the clearing, flanked by Rawlins and 15 armed men. "Blackridge," Harlow called out. "Show yourself." Mason stepped from behind a fallen wall, Winchester cradled in his arms but not raised. His stance was relaxed but balanced, weight slightly forward on the balls of his feet, body angled to present the smallest possible target. "Just us, Harlow," he called. "Send your men back." "My brother died because of that girl's father," Harlow snarled. "An eye for an eye. Biblical justice." "Your brother killed innocent people," Mason replied evenly. "So did you. There's a difference between justice and revenge." "Shoot him," Harlow ordered his men, but Mason was already moving, diving behind a stone wall as gunfire erupted. It was the signal Porter had been waiting for. Rifle fire exploded from the tree line, catching Harlow's men in a deadly crossfire. Several fell immediately, while others scrambled for cover, confused by the unexpected assault. Rawlins, seeing the tide turn, wheeled his horse and fled, taking half the surviving men with him. Harlow was left with a dwindling force, pinned down and outgunned. Mason moved through the chaos like a ghost, working his way toward Harlow's position. A bullet grazed his shoulder, but he barely felt it, focused entirely on his target. When he finally cornered Harlow behind an overturned wagon, the man was down to his last bullets. "It's over," Mason said, rifle leveled at Harlow's chest. "It's never over," Harlow spat, raising his pistol in a final desperate move. Mason's shot was clean and precise, center mass, instantly fatal. Harlow collapsed, his unfired weapon falling from lifeless fingers. The remaining gunmen, seeing their leader fall, threw down their weapons and surrendered. Silence fell over the clearing, broken only by the groans of the wounded and the soft shifting of horses. Sheriff Porter emerged from cover, surveying the carnage with a grim expression. "Guess that settles it," he said, approaching Mason. 12 dead, including Harlow. Rest are headed for territorial prison." Mason nodded, wincing slightly as the adrenaline ebbed and pain from his wound registered. "Sarah?" "Safe. Doc Williams is with her at my office." Word of the battle at the old trading post spread quickly through Silver Creek. By evening, the town was buzzing with the story of how Mason Blackridge and Sheriff Porter had ended the threat of both Edward Harlow and the Rawlins gang in a single afternoon. In the town's small medical office, Doc Williams finished bandaging Mason's shoulder. "Not too deep. You're lucky." Sarah sat nearby, relief evident in her face. "I was worried." Mason flexed his arm, testing the bandage. "Takes more than a bullet graze." Outside the doctor's window, a small crowd had gathered. Unlike before, there were no hostile stares, no whispered condemnations. Instead, faces showed a mixture of awe and newfound respect. "Looks like you've got admirers," Doc Williams nodded toward the window. Mason grimaced. "Rather have peace and quiet." 3 days later, the town council held a special meeting. The mayor himself approached Mason with an offer as he prepared supplies for the return to his cabin. "We need a deputy sheriff, Blackridge. Someone with your capabilities. After what happened with Harlow, folks here see things differently now." Mason shook his head. "I don't belong in town," the mayor persisted. "At least consider it. Town's changing. Railroad's coming through next year. We'll need good men." "I'll think on it," Mason said, though both knew he wouldn't. That evening, Mason found Sarah at the boarding house where she'd been staying since the battle. She'd been contemplating her future, return to distant relatives in Boston who'd barely acknowledged her existence, or forge a new path in this wild territory that had both threatened her life and awakened her strength. I've made my decision, she told Mason as they walked along Silver Creek's main street. I'm staying. He raised an eyebrow, waiting for more. Not because of any romantic notion, she added firmly. For the first time in my life, I know what it means to be free and strong. In Boston, I'd be nothing but a decoration, passed from one guardian to another until I married. Here, she looked toward the mountains. Here I can build something that's mine. Mason considered her words carefully. Then 2 days later, he took her to a small clearing half a mile from his property where an abandoned log cabin stood in need of repair. You can stay here, he said. Learn to be self-sufficient. I'll teach you what you need to know. There was no declaration of love, no romantic promise, just respect between two survivors who understood each other's need for independence. For Sarah, it was more meaningful than any conventional arrangement could have been. As summer faded into autumn, the mountains blazed with color. Mason stood on the ridge above his cabin, Winchester resting on his shoulder, watching the valley below. In the months since the confrontation with Harlow, Silver Creek had changed. New buildings were going up in anticipation of the railroad. More settlers arrived weekly. The town's attitude toward Mason had shifted too. Where once there had been fear and suspicion, now there was a cautious respect. He was still the Steel Mountain Man, still someone they viewed with awe rather than acceptance, but no longer an outcast. Sarah had transformed the small cabin into a proper home, repairing the roof herself, planting a garden, even hunting small game. She'd become a familiar sight in town, trading herbs she grew and furs she prepared. The women who had once condemned her now sought her remedies for winter coughs. Not accepted fully, perhaps, but respected for her independence. She visited Mason's cabin often, sometimes staying for days to learn tracking or shooting, but maintained her separate life, a strength he admired. Their relationship defied conventional understanding, neither romantic nor merely friendly. It was built on shared survival and mutual respect. In the distance, a stagecoach wound its way toward Silver Creek, a harbinger of the changing times. Civilization was pushing westward, bringing both progress and new challenges. The frontier was disappearing, one settlement at a time. The world is changing, Mason thought, but these mountains will stand. That evening, as they shared a meal by Mason's fire, Sarah spoke of her plans to expand her garden come spring, to perhaps raise chickens. Mason listened, offering practical advice where needed. You know, she said during a lull in conversation, most people in town think we're going to marry eventually. Mason nearly choked on his coffee. That what you want? She smiled, shaking her head. I didn't escape one predetermined life to rush into another, but I do value what we have. And what's that? He asked, genuinely curious about her perception. Sarah considered carefully. Partnership, respect, freedom to be who we are. She met his eyes across the fire. Isn't that worth more than conventional arrangements? Mason felt something shift in his chest. Not the rush of romantic love, but something equally powerful. Understanding, recognition of a kindred spirit. Yes, he said simply, it is. As night settled over the mountains, they sat in comfortable silence. Two survivors forged in blood and fire, who had found in each other not the conventional comforts of love, but something perhaps more valuable, true understanding and mutual respect. For a man who had known only war and solitude, and a woman who had lost everything, it was a new beginning neither had dared hope for. Not a fairy tale ending, but something real, something that could endure like the mountains themselves. The Steel Mountain Man turned his gaze toward the wilderness he called home, a rare smile softening his weathered features. Some battles were worth fighting, some people worth protecting. In this harsh land, that was as close to peace as a man could hope to find, and for now it was enough.